Good morning, everyone. I am Andrew Clear. I'm a PM on the Bot Framework SDK team. I used to be a PM on the Teams team, on the Teams app platform team. Moved over to the Bot Framework team, but still dealing with bots, been with bots on both sides of the fence. And today, what we're going to be talking about is what's new in the Bot Framework world. Traditionally, when we've done a talk like this, we've been really focused on Teams specific things in the Bot Framework world. Today we're going to go a bit broader and talk about more generally applicable things that we've not really ever talked about in a Teams community call before. So that's me. You can follow me on Twitter at aclear16. If you reach out to me on Twitter with any questions, you can either just tweet at me or DM me, and I will help. If I don't know the answer, I will do my best to help find the answer. So please feel free to follow me and reach out to me on Twitter if you have any questions after the presentation. So today we're going to be talking about a large variety of topics, some of which are hot off the press and or still in preview, and a bunch of different Get member changes that are specific to Teams. I'll go into skills and the future of skills in the Bot Framework world. We're going to talk a lot about adaptive, declarative, and composer, because that's a big new thing that's going to change the way people build bots a lot. And along that same vein, we're going to talk a bit about Power Virtual Agents. I'll do some demos. There won't be much. We won't be writing any live code today, but I will show some code and kind of walk through a couple different things to see how it goes. And then, as always, at the end, we will have a long Q&A session where you can ask as many questions as you like, and I'll try to either answer them or point you in the right direction or take your information down to follow up later. All right. So right off the bat, today is the release day for Bot Framework for the 4.8 SDK. We think it should be released in a couple of hours. That'll be out there. There's a bunch of improvements in there around a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. So right off the bat, we're going to talk about the Get member changes specific to Teams. So this is the only portion of today's talk that will be 100% focused on Teams rather than just general Bot Framework at all. If you don't know the background of why the Get member endpoints, or the roster calls, as we sometimes refer to them, are changing for Teams, there's a blog post that you can check out down here. I've made a little AKA for it. It'll be in the slides once they get posted. You can also just Google search for Teams Get member changes, and it'll be right at the top. It's also available in the documentation. The Teams documentation has a page dedicated to outlining the upcoming member changes. If you are writing bots for Teams, you need to be aware of these changes, particularly if you have any bots in production that use the roster. The payload that the roster is going to be returning is going to change. You'll be getting less information by default from any roster call. So I highly recommend you check out that blog post if you haven't already, or the documentation. So what we've added in 4.8, first off, is the ability to get a single member. So you can retrieve a Teams channel account object by the ID, Teams ID, UPN. I think there's actually one more. It's pretty straightforward. It's just teamsinfo.getMember or getMember async, depending on your language. Pass in a turn context and an ID, and it will give you back a Teams channel account. This is very useful in large teams when you're checking if you have a UPN or whatever, and you'll want to find out if they're in a particular roster, or you need to exchange a AAD ID for a Teams ID so you can send a proactive message, but you don't want to grab the whole roster and then page through everything, particularly in large teams that can become prohibitive. So that's definitely, I will put that. Oh, thank you, Dana. I appreciate it. I was just about to say I should do that, but you did it for me. The link for that blog post is in the meeting chat. So it's there. So you can click on it instead of trying to memorize the random string of letters and numbers. Anyways, back to get single member. So single member is pretty straightforward. Returns a single Teams channel account. This is super useful in large teams. A lot of this is large team support. get paged members. So the paged member endpoints already existed, but we have made them so that they return Teams channel accounts. We've made an implementation of it that returns team channel accounts rather than channel accounts. So the paged endpoint essentially is going to return a Teams paged member result that has a continuation token and an array of members that are Teams channel accounts. And then you can use the continuation token to get pages. The page size, I think the minimum is like 50 and the max is, I think maybe the minimum is it's 50 to 500, I think. I can't remember. But it'll be documented over the next few days. And if you send a bad page size, it will kind of just ignore you. So this is going to be the new default way for you to retrieve members. So if you have a chance to, I would update your code to use the page member endpoint, particularly if you're enabled to operate in teams. You don't know how big the team that your bot is going to work in is going to be. So using the paged endpoint is going to be critical for your bot's success, because your bot will be working one day and then all of a sudden it will stop working because your get member calls start timing out because the team got too big. So I highly recommend if you do a get members call inside of a team, you want to switch over to this endpoint as soon as possible. Okay, so there's a question from chat. Is there ever going to be an easy way to proactively message all users inside your organization's directory? The root of the question is proactive messaging is hard, and it's frustrating how hard it is. It's hard for a reason, because the Teams team, I say we, I'm no longer on the Teams team, but I'll speak for them for a little bit here. The Teams team erred on the side of caution with the rules around proactive messaging. So essentially what they've done is said, hey, you can't just create a bot that can spam people. You need to be in the context of a user somehow in order to start sending them messages. We don't want you to be able to just bulk pull a list of everyone and start blasting out proactive messages. There needs to be some kind of reason why you know that they exist. In most contexts, that makes a lot of sense. When you're building a bot for your organization that you are your organization's IT, that's kind of frustrating. So it makes it difficult to solve that solution. The app template for the company communicator app template was sort of meant to be a bridge between those two worlds. And that's current state of affairs of where we are right now. I know that everyone is very aware that this is a pain point. So I would expect that improvements will continue to be made in this space, but I am totally not prepared to say what any of those improvements are. But I will say that the team is well aware that proactive messaging continues to be a pain point, and we need to continue to iterate and improve upon it and make it better and easier to send messages across an organization, when you know that this bot should obviously be able to just send messages to everyone in an organization. Whether that's a bot solution or a graph solution, that will be something that's addressed in the future. Thanks for asking. That's an important thing that I know has been frustrating for a lot of folks that are trying to build line of business bots. All right, so that's enough about team specific stuff. Now we're going to move on to bot framework specific stuff, because I think there's a bunch of cool stuff in here that doesn't ever really get talked about inside teams. So the first thing that I want to talk about is skills. So skills are at their root the idea of bots talking to bots. The ability for a bot to send a message, to get a message from an end user, send it on to a different bot, get a response from the bot, respond back to the person who aided them. So the cool thing about skills, and a little bit of history on skills before I dive into this diagram too much, because skills have kind of evolved over time. So they originally were part of the virtual assistant world. If you've ever used virtual assistants for building bots, it's a super cool sort of almost software as a service solution built on top of the bot framework that can help you build virtual assistants for your organization fairly quickly. Skills kind of originated there with the 4.7 SDK. We a couple months ago we pulled them into the core SDK, so they were part of the core bot framework idea. And then with this release, we've done some additional work so that this world is currently possible. So you can imagine you've got an end user who's talking to an assistant, and that assistant is a current, .NET bot built on top of the 4.8 SDK, then that bot has a bunch of stuff that it can do, for you. But if you ask it an HR question, it's going to actually farm that off to a different bot, which is an older V3 bot built on Node. And now notice what we're ending up here with is V4 and V3 interop, because we've wrapped our V3 bot with the brand new point release to the V3 SDK that we're releasing very shortly. You will be able to wrap a V3 bot and talk to it from a V4 bot. So that's pretty cool. And also language interrupt, it doesn't matter. So you can do a cross version and a cross language interrupt with skills. One of the big benefits of them. And then they can actually be as deep as you want. So HR can send off to another skill, which can send off to another skill. And then the calendar is a completely different skill built on Python. So the idea here is that each of these nodes is a bot in and of itself and can pass off to other bots to farm out information. Okay, so that's the good thing about skills. The bad thing about skills is these are completely different bots. So you are introducing network complexity and latency into any of these handoffs. So you need to decide whether or not the trade-offs here are worth it. But that's the general idea of skills. To dive into one of these interactions a little bit further so you can kind of see what's going on, the client app over here is the end user sending a message. It sends it to the root bot, and I'll go into vocabulary a little bit because it's kind of important in a bit, but the client app sends a message. It hits the adapter. It says, hey, gives it to the root bot. The root bot says, hey, this needs to go to a skill. So it's going to fire off to a skill. It's got an HTTP client and it's dedicated to that particular skill. It hands it off to the skill. The skill does what it does, returns it back to the root bot. The root bot then passes it back to the client app. So there's a couple important things going on here. One that you need to realize is that the skill bot will never interact directly with the end user. So it's not like you're not passing off the interaction to the skill. You are passing through the interaction to the skill, which means that the root bot can always act both before and after the skill does its stuff. So it's kind of the same way that middleware works right now. It's always going to get the option on the way in and the option on the way out to take an action, and it can do whatever it wants. These another good thing to keep in mind is these are two very distinct conversations with different conversation IDs. The user is having a conversation with the root bot, and the root bot is having a conversation with the skill. So that means that you're getting different conversations IDs across both of these boundaries. So there's obviously things that you need to do in order to make sure that you're tracking those things and keeping them all mapped together and they're all working happily and healthily together. So, but that's basically the core idea of the skill, is that the root bot is able to have conversations with other bots. Some general vocabulary and responsibility, the way the responsibilities break down. So the skill consumer, in the last diagram, that's what we were calling the root bot, but we've tried to kind of natively want to jump to parent and child bots, but since you can chain them together, it can be in any particular bot can be both a skill consumer and a skill depending upon context. Calling them parent and child gets confusing as well. So we've come up with skill consumer is the bot that is dispatching activities to the skill. It's the one that gets to act both before and after the skill, and it's actually where all the complexity is in this. So building the skill consumer is more difficult than building the skill itself. The skill consumer is going to need to be responsible for deciding which skill it's going to. If it's got 10 different skills, it has to handle all of the dispatch, choosing which skill it needs to give which messages to, and all of that kind of stuff. So the skill consumer is where all of the complexity is. The skill itself is actually fairly simple. Any bot can be converted to a skill pretty quickly. Basically, all you're going to do is say, hey, I get to receive messages from another bot. You can limit which bots can consume you as a skill, so you can limit them by ID. So this is for like monetization scenarios and stuff like that, or just security in general. But you can say only bots 1 through 10 get to call me. And then you can publish a manifest to describe your function. If you want to make your skill publicly available, like anybody could, you could publish a calendar skill that anybody could consume. So I'll show you how that works in a bit. But the core concept here, we've got two things. The skill consumer is dispatching activities to a skill, and then the skill itself, mostly just a bot. It doesn't actually do anything different. So a little bit more on skills. They work with invokes. So you could have, for example, a skill that was dedicated to handling your search-based messaging extension or your messaging extension with a search command. So and you could just pass those invokes along to that skill and then return them. As of 4.8, they work with dialogs. So if you have a waterfall dialog, you can use a skill to complete the dialogue. They support user authentication, but it's local to whichever bot in the chain asked for it, and you can't pass the authentication from bot to bot. So that can be frustrating if both the parent and the child are going to need authentication. You're probably going to want to deal with that in a graceful way if you control both ends of that equation. But security being what it is, it's not really a good idea to just say, hey, you logged in over here, so now you're logged in over there, with no trust relationship established between the two things. You can always establish your own trust relationship, just there's not one by default. A skill consumer can consume multiple skills, and a skill can be consumed by multiple skill consumers, and a skill consumer can be a skill as well as a skill consumer. So there's lots of composition complexity that you can create here. Be careful, because all of that adds complexity. So make sure you've got a good reason for doing everything that you're doing. But if you need to, you can make the tree pretty deep. A skill consumer can be running more than one skill in parallel, and handling dispatching and keeping track of what's going on. The bot service and the bot registration provides the bot-to-bot authentication. You do it by ID and app secret. So that's how it's going to create a secure communication over HTTP between the skill and the skill consumer. And again, it's important to keep in mind each bot-to-bot conversation is a different conversation. It's going to have different conversation IDs need to be, and it's going to need you need to keep track of it as a different conversation ID. We've got a conversation ID factory that will help you build conversation IDs. Another important thing to keep in mind is there's no channel between the skill and the skill consumer. This is Bot Framework channel, not Teams channel. So Bot Framework channels like Teams is a channel, web chat is a channel, direct line is a channel. Between the two bots, there's no channel that exists between there. So some of the stuff that the channel does for you need to do. Well, the SDK helps you, but you need to do it yourself. So things like creating the conversation ID, that's normally handled by the channel. There is no channel, so you have to create your own conversation ID. There's a configuration stuff that needs to happen so that the two things can communicate together securely. But it's kind of an interesting world where they're just talking directly to each other over HTTP posts. And then the future. So the idea, so we're just in the beginning of this world, and we're starting to scratch the surface of what's possible, but we want to build towards a true component model for bots where you can have multiple bots that you can build a component library of bots. There can be open source, publicly available skills that people can consume, and we can compose these things however we want. So skills are sort of in the very early stages of laying the groundwork for this. You can imagine, just grabbing from a library of skills and then turning your bot on, and voila, you've got a bot. And if you want to make your bot smarter, you just grab a new skill or you plug in a new skill. So that's kind of the idea that the North Star is a true component model for bots that allows you to just sort of plug and play these things and make sure they all work happily together for all eternity. Of course they will. It'll work. It'll be tomorrow. We're going to get there. So I'm going to show a quick, that transition is super slow. We're going to jump into some code for skills, and then we'll look at a skill in action. So I've got in our Bot Framework sample repository, we have a set of samples right now, we have one sample right now for skills. We're about to add a couple more over the next week and a half, as well as some additional documentation for, particularly for the V3 to V4 interop scenario. But the sample that we have right now is just a single root bot and an echo that passes off to an echo bot as a skill. but I did want to show a couple things inside here. So we'll start out inside the skill itself. So the skill itself is really not very interesting. It's essentially not much changes inside the skill. It's just a bot that's going to respond to an activity from another bot like it would any other bot. The only thing that we need to add in terms of the skill, we go into the bot itself. What we are doing, so basically we're saying if the activity text has end or stop, what we're going to do is we're going to say we are going to tell the user we're ending the conversation, but then we're going to send a new activity type called an end of conversation activity. And the end of conversation activity is going to tell the skill consumer, hey, I'm done with this conversation, stop forwarding me messages, and move on with your life. So this is sort of the big change inside of the skill itself, is you need to be able to send these end of conversation activities at the end of any conversation threads. Oh, and the other bit is the allowed callers. So this is where I said the skill can limit who can consume it. So basically what we're saying is you can load up a list of bot IDs from a configuration file, or you could hard code them if you wanted to, or whatever. And then you can add them to your allowed callers, your list of allowed callers, which will make it so your skill can block random bots from trying to consume them as a skill. I'm not going to go into skill manifests right now. I'll show you them in context of PVA here in a bit, but for right now, just know that a skill needs to essentially do three things. The allowed callers list, you don't have to do the allowed callers list. You can choose to do the allowed callers list to limit which skill consumers can consume you. You need to send end of conversations when you're done so that you can release control of the conversation back to the skill consumer. And then the other optional thing that a skill can do is publish a manifest, which basically describes the capabilities of the bot, what information you should send it when you're starting a conversation, and those sorts of things. It's language understanding model, that sort of stuff, so that the skill consumer can more intelligently send it the correct information. It's also going to be used for any application that's going to help you plug a skill into an existing bot, and I'll show you that inside PVA. Okay, so that's the skill side. On the root bot side, this is where pretty much all of the complexity is. So you're going to see immediately that we normally have just with the one bot controller. We need a new controller to have a conversation with the skill. Remember, there's no channel here, so we're actually going to define a new route to pass information, to pass these messages on to the skill. So the skill is going to talk to me on, or all of my skills are going to talk to me on API/skills. And then I'm going to have conversations with the end user on API/messages. Inside my app settings, I'm going to define skills that I'm going to consume. So we're going to add the app ID, and I need to know the endpoint for the skill. I'm going to add that for every single one of these skills. And then once I've added it there, inside my startup, I'm going to need to wire them up. I'm going to turn on my skill HTTP client, a bunch of stuff. So there's a bunch of boilerplate stuff that needs to happen inside here in order to sort of wire everything up and make sure that you can send and receive messages to the skill. On the bot side itself, you're going to, inside the constructor for your bot, you're going to construct your skill clients. And this one, we're just using a single skill. So we're going to we're going to wire up that one skill. We're going to override the on turn activity, which is not normally done. You don't normally override the on turn activity. So when you're doing this, you need to make sure that you call base. Otherwise, bad things will happen. But yeah, so you're in the on turn, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, this is where we are going to forward messages onto the skill. So we're going to say if it's not an end of conversation, and also there is an active skill, we're going to go ahead and send the activity on to the skill. We're just going to pass that through. Now, this is where, when I said you're going to have the opportunity to act before. So if you want to do interrupts, or you want to be able to do, complex dispatching where you're checking the user intent before continuing to forward it on. The canonical example is usually you're in the book of flights thing and someone's like, show me the weather. You need to be able to detect that. This is where you would detect that. And then we're also going to do, so we need a way to start to fire up the skill process. So in this case, the user says skill, we're going to say, sweet, turn it, connecting you to the skill. And then we're going to go ahead and set the active skill property to our one skill since we've only got the one. And then we're going to forward the activity along to the skill. So this is going to start the skill pipeline. Otherwise, we're just going to say, I don't know what to do, because the only thing this bot does is connect you to a skill. And then the last thing that we need to do is handle the end of conversation. So we need to be able to handle the end of conversation if we receive it from the skill. And we also, if we're doing any interrupts or anything, we need to be able to handle it incoming from the skill. And we also need to be able to send them one if we want to be able to proactively end the conversation. The end of conversation works both ways. The skill can send one to the skill consumer, and the skill consumer can send one to the skill. So that either way you can end the conversation. And both endpoints need to deal with that elegantly. So if you're saving state, you need to clean up your dialogue stack, whatever you need to do to sort of end the conversation gracefully, so that the next time you start the conversation, the user's not in some weird mixed state. So yeah, both sides need to handle the end of conversation. That's pretty much it that I wanted to show inside here. There's a whole bunch more in this world that you can do. I recommend checking out our documentation if you want to learn more, but I've got a whole bunch of other stuff that I want to demo today, so I don't want to spend much more time in here. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions on skills on what we just talked about? Oh, I see one. Can we send notification to client app when someone calls the team's call number? Not sure what you mean by when someone calls the team's call number. So you mean like the call into a meeting number? Okay. Yeah. So there, as far as I'm aware, there is no trigger that handle for inside the Teams client for when someone calls a phone number. For a meeting, you would get a meeting join notification, but in general, no, there's no trigger for that. If you would like one, I would suggest leaving feedback. I'll give you the link to the Teams feedback stuff in the end, but that I'm not sure if that's on their radar. So you might want to use the feedback mechanism and send them that. If we've got time at the end, I'll circle back and we can talk more about that one. But I'm going to go ahead and move on unless there are any other skills specific questions. So the next thing that we're going to talk about, and this is a pretty big topic, is adaptive, which is the new type of dialogue, the ability to build dialogues declaratively, LU and LG, which is language understanding and language generation files. There's a common expression library. There's a UI component. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So this is sort of the one of the major things we've been working on, and we think it's pretty awesome. So let's jump in. All right. The goal with the adaptive dialogue stack is to make dialogue-based bots that are event-driven rather than waterfall. So right now, the waterfall and the prompt stack work very well if you want to have a conversation on Rails and drive a user towards a very specific goal. But in order to build a bot that handles interrupts and context switching and stuff, it is difficult and requires a bunch of boilerplate code and a lot of oddness that you're just kind of like, well, someone said to copy paste this code here, so I did it, and it seems to kind of work, so I'll just run with that. So dialogue, we want to make dialogue-based bots that are event-driven, that adjust to context, and then each dialogue itself should be a cohesive, self-contained unit. The dialogue has a bunch of different parts to it. A dialogue with the bot, you've got what the bot is going to say to the user. You've got the intelligent understanding model trying to figure out what the user is saying to the bot. You've got different actions and triggers and a whole bunch of different stuff. Now, all of that stuff should be contained inside of the same unit rather than spread across 15 different things where you kind of have to, in reverse, stitch it all back together. And we also wanted to be able to build it declaratively rather than procedurally, so that you can more easily share and cross language and all this stuff doesn't really matter because the dialogue itself, which is dealing with text by and large and not logic, so we should be able to build them in a way that's language agnostic. So put another way, we want to make this bot easy. So the user says, I want to book a flight. The bot says, sure, where do you want to go? The user's like, wait, how's the weather in Seattle? The bot just immediately responds with, it's 72 and sunny in Seattle. The user then says, Seattle. The bot's like, sweet, you're flying to Seattle. Where are you flying from? The user says 3/18. Okay, so you're flying to Seattle on March 18th. Again, where are you flying from? You can make this bot right now with the waterfall stack, but it's hard. And it takes a lot of oddness to make this bot. Adaptive makes building this bot pretty straightforward, which we think is pretty cool. You see, we're dealing with a couple different things, right? The user is interrupting the bot in the middle of a stack and saying, hey, I want to switch intents and do something different. They're responding with types of information that the bot isn't prompting them for right now, right? It said, where do you want to fly from? And the user gave a date. The bot's smart enough to say, oh, look, you gave me a date. I know that I need a date in order to complete this set of this interaction. I'm just going to assume that that date maps to this part of the pie. So it's sort of intelligently deciding how to map all this stuff together. All right. So some vocabulary before we jump into demoing and looking at stuff. So an adaptive dialogue sort of consists of 5 different pieces. You've got your recognizer, which is your language understanding, Lewis or regex or whatever. That's what you're using to extract the user's intent from whatever they're saying. Triggers, which are initiating dialogues in response to events. The actions inside of a dialogue are the steps that the bot is taking and how the bot should respond. Inputs, these are not user inputs. These are like inputs into the dialogue itself. They're pieces of information that the bot needs to collect. In the previous example, the inputs were the destination city, the originating city, and the date that you wanted to fly on. And you can see that we're talking about them specifically because this is what powers the user's ability to say 3/18 in response to a prompt for a different input. So that's why we model them sort of as a very specific thing. And then the generator or the language generator, which allows you to alter the way that the bot responds so that it sounds more natural. So instead of always saying hi, sometimes it says hi, sometimes it says hello, sometimes it says good day, sometimes it says banana. It doesn't really matter, but you can craft a bot that mixes up what it says so that it doesn't sound quite so robotic. And because it can all be built declaratively, your dialogue can look like this. So this is an example of an adaptive dialogue written in JSON. You can see we're going to define, we're going to say, hey, this is an adaptive dialogue. We're going to add a trigger. The trigger is when the dialogue starts. We're going to say inside this trigger, the actions are, we're going to do an if condition. If the username is null, go ahead and prompt for the username, and we're going to set the user.name from whatever the text input is. Otherwise, if this if condition isn't met, we're going to go ahead and send an activity that says, hello, username, nice to talk to you. So this is a bot completely written in JSON. Yeah, you could do this in YAML if you're weird, but do it in JSON because JSON's better. Sorry, YAML's awesome for everyone who likes YAML. YAML's a perfectly acceptable way to write declarative things. Yeah, we'll move on from that. Anyways, so yeah, that's an adaptive dialogue built in JSON. It's pretty cool, and they can get as complex or as not complex as you want. And a lot of you might be looking at this and going, "Wow, that's really verbose," and I wouldn't want to write all of that and do a bunch of crazy stuff. Why can't I just write code? You can still write code. You can write adaptive dialogues procedurally as well. There's no requirement that they must be built declaratively, but you also can build in this way because of Composer. So that's my transition to Composer. And adaptive dialogues are in preview. We're getting close to stable, so I didn't call that out specifically. It was on the title slide, but I want to make sure I call it out. They're still in preview, and Composer is in preview, so all of this is not 100% guaranteed to have no breaking changes, but we're getting real close to stable, and at this point, we pretty sure there's not going to be there won't be any major breaking changes at this point. We're pretty far down the road. So, but anyways, declarative dialogue to Composer. And Composer is UI bot building for developers. It's a way to manage all of what I just talked about from a single app platform. And I'm not even going to have any more slides about it. We're just going to jump right into a demo on Composer because it's way easier to show than it is to talk about. There's going to be a couple different ways to run Composer. Right now, it's a hosted node application. So you can see I'm hosting it and running it from my own computer, localhost 3000. You could also host it on inside your company's infrastructure or whatever, and have multiple people connect to the same instance. And there's also going to be a self-contained way to run Composer sort of as a Electron app. So right now, this is the Composer. There's a bunch already. We have a ton of samples and guidance and help videos, and there's a whole ton of documentation that goes along with it and stuff. So even though we're in preview, we're pretty far along the preview world. So it is truly public preview at this point. So what Composer is going to allow you to do is work with bots built on top of the adaptive stack. So we're going to jump in. I've got one of the sample bots opened up. You can create, there's a whole bunch, you can create a new bot. We've got a bunch of templates that you can use that will help walk you through and show you what's possible and yeah, the best way to figure out how Composer works right now is we have a phenomenal tutorial on the doc repository that gives you a really good overview of all of what's possible. One thing to keep in mind is this is a developer focused tool. So it's not a no code tool. So I just want to set that expectation from the front. This is not intended, nor will it ever be intended to be a no code or even a low code tool. This is a developer integrated development experience. It's not an IDE. I shouldn't say anyways, it's not an IDE, but it is very much intended to be a developer tool and not a no code or low code tool. So I've got one open. I'm going to go ahead and jump in there and we'll talk about it a little bit. Over here on the left, you're going to see my list of dialogues with my list of triggers, and then inside each trigger is going to be an action. So I've got the one to-do bot dialog that I've got open. You can see I'm setting a recognizer type, so I can choose to use either Lewis or regular expressions, or maybe I don't have a recognizer because I don't need one. In this case, I'm going to use Lewis, and I'll show you how Composer works with Lewis to help you train your models without having to change context, which is pretty awesome. So in my first trigger, the welcome user, and there are a whole bunch of different trigger types that you can do. So we can do a whole bunch of different trigger types when you're creating new triggers. You can create oh my God, I don't know what the user is talking about, or you can do different events or a bunch of different stuff. But so we've got our welcome one, which is when we receive a conversation update activity. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do a loop. And you can see already right off the bat, right, for each value in some part of the activity model. So in order to do this, you need to understand the activity model and all the stuff that was going on there. But for each member added in the activity, we're going to check and see, is this, as long as it's not the recipient.id, as long as we're not talking about the bot just got added to the conversation, we're going to go ahead and, so you'll notice, right, we've got a whole expressions language, a whole bunch of stuff going on inside here. So this is my if condition, and then we've got a true and a false branch. On the true branch, we're going to send a welcome message. And this is where we start to get into, okay, I was talking about language generation and the ability to compose your responses and make them a bit more natural and a bit more interesting. So the language generation, this one in particular is calling a function, and it's the welcome message function. So I can jump over here and I can check out my bot responses, and I can see this is the list of all of the responses from my bot inside this particular bot. And in this case, we're talking about the welcome message. So the welcome message is an array of activities, and we're adding, so the text is the welcome prefix plus some words plus the welcome suffix, and then we're going to tack on the welcome actions, which is, so then we're composing all of these different things. We're saying the welcome prefix first. So the welcome prefix is one of hi, hello, or hiya. So at runtime, one of those three will get inserted there on the to-do sample bot, and then we're going to add the suffix, which is how can I be of help today, or what can I do for you? And then we're going to tack on the welcome actions, which is actually a list of suggested actions, which is one of these suggested actions. So at runtime, we're going to compose all of this stuff together, and that's how we're going to create a response. Now, this can obviously be as complex or as not complex as you want it. So there's no reason that you need to compose things this complicated or even use these functions if you don't need them. If all you needed to say was, what can I do for you today with a list of suggested actions, you can do that right from here, right? We don't have to jump around and do all that other stuff. But if you want to build a more complex message, you have the option of doing so. So either or. One of the nice things about the way language generation is formatted and the way both the LG language generation files and LU language understanding files, the way that they're formatted is kind of in a semi-markdown format, which is really nice because you can actually share them with other people. A lot of times there are subject matter experts or copywriters or other people that you want to write these options for you. With the way that these files are formatted, right? It's just in most cases it's just simple markdown. This one's pretty complex since we're doing some actual taking advantage of activities. But in a lot of cases, it's just text. So you can share them with people and they can help you write them outside of the context of your code. So it can be a good way to sort of crowdsource both your language understanding and your language generation models, which can make for a much better bot experience for end users. All right, so that's a little bit on language generation. We want to talk about language understanding. So we talked about language generation. Also, the composer works tightly with Lewis if you're using it as your language understanding model or as your recognizer to help you train your model. So one of the things I can do is right here. So these are the intents for this. So this is the trigger is intent recognized, and then we're going to say, okay, so since we're having a trigger of intent recognized, we need to be able to train our recognizer. So if you were using the regular expression recognizer, this is where you write your regular expression to parse out the intent of the user. But since we're using Lewis, we need to train our model. So we're going to use a language understanding model to say, hey, these are the types of things a user might say in order for us to say we know that they want help. So I can very quickly add a new one. So we've got all of these ones that are already, and now I'm like, okay, so this seems to be something my users are saying a lot, and it's not hitting my model correctly. So I want to retrain my model. So I can just add it right here, and I can say restart bot, and you'll see that it says publishing. And because this is hooked up with Lewis and it has my authoring key, it's going to go ahead and see over here in Lewis. Here's the model for my bot. All of this model was trained directly from Composer. I never actually went in here and messed with any of this. So the idea is that from Composer you can very quickly either crowdsource this if you know you can talk to subject matter experts to help you. I'm going to jump off of Composer right now because I still want to talk about PVA a bit and leave time for Q&A. So we're going to jump away from Composer. I highly recommend, if this looks interesting to you, go check out the docs. They are available docs.microsoft.com/composer. Pretty straightforward. You can download it from GitHub, run it yourself locally, test it out, try it out. And we have more about adaptive dialogs. I've created an AKA for it because it's kind of buried inside of our samples repository, but there's more samples and stuff that you can download there. So there's a ton of stuff you can do with Composer. I didn't even begin to scratch the surface. You can add all different kinds of triggers and dialogue management, localization, and just a bunch of stuff that I haven't even begun to touch on. You could do hours on top of Composer itself. So I recommend checking it out. Check out the tutorial. It takes about 45 minutes to run through the tutorial. Once you've done the tutorial, you'll have a really good understanding of how Composer works and how it all fits together. You remember skills from earlier. Imagine skills plugging into, you can't do it yet, but what we want to be able to do is you can hand off one of those triggers to a skill. So you can plug in, that kind of goes to the component world future of skills, of bots in general, is the ability to, from there, you can have an old V3 skill that you don't know and you want to use adaptive dialogue. So you build an adaptive dialogue in Composer, and then you plug in that old V3 skill inside that world. So it's sort of starting to compose all of these things together so you can get all of the bits and pieces work. Okay, so now we're going to totally switch gears, and we're going to talk about Power Virtual Agents, which is UI bot building for everyone, or not developers in this case, because we've got Composer for developers, Power Virtual Agents for not developers, or if you just want to do something simple. So what are Power Virtual Agents? It's a part of the Power Platform. So I'm not part of the Power Platform team, but I'm going to do this because it touches my stuff. Take that with a grain of everything I say about Power Virtual Agents with a grain of salt. Not part of the team, but definitely have worked with them really closely on making it work well with Bot Framework. Anyways, they're part of the Power Platform. It's built on top of the Bot Framework service. You can extend Power Virtual Agents with skills. So that's where you sort of pull in your existing bits into a Power Virtual Agent side bot. But basically, it's Power Automate for bots. And let's just jump into a demo because we're running low on time. Okay, so Power Virtual Agents, powerva.microsoft.com. It's a whole new way to build and manage bots. So it's kind of similar in concept to what we were doing with Composer, but it's a little bit more UI friendly and less code that you can build inside here. So same kind of concepts apply. What they're calling topics, we would call dialogs. And then inside the dialogue, you can have trigger phrases. So in this example, there are 4 different trigger phrases. This is a little bit different than Composer, right? We're not training a language understanding model. This is sort of self-contained software as a service offering, right? This is all very self-contained inside itself. You add a bunch of trigger phrases, and then so when a user says, "When are you closed?" I can then create sort of a workflow style set of messages and responses. There's a bunch of logic that you can do inside here, if else loops, for loops, a whole bunch of craziness inside here. But the core idea is that this is all a little bit easier for anybody to understand, right? So you're just writing messages. What you're adding in here is pretty straightforward in terms of what you can do. But the one thing that I do want to show inside here is the ability to add skills. So in Power Virtual Agents, you can wire up a skill by using its skill manifest. So I've got a couple wired up inside here. So my skill is actually a hosted bot that lives out somewhere in the world that I'm adding into Power Virtual Agents so that I can say, hey, cool, I can do all of this stuff in Power Virtual Agents. Here's something that's too complex, or I've already built this skill that I want to make it part of this broader thing that I'm building and releasing to my customers. Don't really want to rebuild the bot because there's no reason to do that. I can write a manifest for the bot, make it, add the end of conversation logic and the small little amount of changes I need to turn that bot into a skill. And then I can add it to Power Virtual Agents. Not going to go through this too much, but you can you basically add it by the manifest. And then you can see for a more complex one, the manifest is going to describe 3 different actions that the skill can take. You can maybe describe inputs and outputs. It's going to output the flight number and return the flight number to the parent bot or whatever. And then once you've added them, you can plug them into any pipeline, any one of your workflows as an action. So we've got a trigger phrase of skill. We're going to switch to the skill, and then I'm going to add the skill as an action to the workflow. So that will then pass off control to the skill, and then on the end of conversation from the skill, it'll hand it back to Power Virtual Agents. So again, to go back to that component model, we're trying to make all of these things fit and work together happily. Okay, so that's my 30-second Power Virtual Agents demo. Sorry for running low on time, but I did want to show that real quick. It's kind of why skills and stitching all this stuff together. So that's sort of it. That's all that I've got for today. Inside the slide deck, you will find a whole bunch of resources inside here, including a couple of my favorite, the Teams developer documentation, aka.ms/teamsdev, and then the Teams developer feedback page that outlines how to provide the feedback, which Dana has put also into the chat. aka.ms/teams dev feedback. They are one of the best teams I've ever seen at Microsoft in responding to the channels that are outlined there. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to them. But I have time to hang out for a few more minutes and answer any questions. So if anybody has questions, I can totally answer them. But if not, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, this is Inayat from Dubai, Mohammed bin Rashid University. Just wondering if the presentations and the videos can be shared. I didn't know about this. I was just informed about the session few minutes ago. I'm only in this session for the last 15 minutes. So it would be great if you can share me the videos to all the participants probably.
Yeah, hey,
so
Andrew, I
go
can
ahead.
take that one.
Yep.
So in the chat, I put a couple of links. One is, and Andrew, if you go back a couple slides to the Microsoft 365. Okay, so these are topics for all of our Microsoft 365 developer platform. We have two places that are great to follow us. One is our Microsoft 365 developer handle on Twitter. And then also you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and it has all of the links and all of the recordings for these calls for the last couple years since we've started them. Team specific, I know there was a question about when the next call is, and it's the third Tuesday of every month. And so if we go to this aka.ms Microsoft Teams community call, you can download the calendar series. It will populate on your calendar. There's a join link there. So it will be really easy to just join in at 8 a.m. Pacific time every third Tuesday of the month. It's a lot of information. We'll have links and resources in our blog posts that we will put out there. And then in the recording, you can grab these links as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a question to circle back to the voice question that was asked earlier. The idea of being able to intercept, and not meeting calls, but direct phone calls. Teams has ability to replace your phone system. For the purposes of a CRM POP, is there any discussion on that, or is there any direction? Maybe we can get, look for some articles and get warm on that.
I do not believe I know there is not currently a trigger for receiving a phone call that can be passed off to an app.
There kind of is. It's Chris from Computer Talk here. I just know we've messed with it. Take a look at they just rebranded it. It was the compliance recording APIs. Now it's the policy recording APIs. But what that does, you have to enable a calling bot. But what that will do is let you apply a policy to a user, and it will pull your bot into a call before it connects to the user.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. So yeah, you're talking. Sorry, I thought you wanted to hand off details of the call directly to an app.
We would want to do that. We'd need the phone number in order to do a CRM POP.
Yeah, but what I'm wondering is, could you write a recording bot that's not actually recording, but you're getting a notification that the user's getting a call, and then sending them a notification or something out of band?
You could probably retrieve the phone numbers. So it would be sort of asynchronous in that case, right? The whoever's answering the call would get the results from your application a little bit after the call had started, because the call would come in, you would pull in I guess you could wait. It's kind of a workaround, but I think that might work.
Yeah, I have another question if you don't mind. Inayat again from Dubai.
Sorry, there was one that was asked in chat that I wanted to answer real quick. Can we add a virtual agent embedded to a website? Yes, you can. You can actually add them in Teams too. So this is my virtual agent bot inside Teams. So it's pretty cool. It's just a bot behind the scenes, right? It's just a Bot Framework bot that's running. And if I say skill, I'm going to hand off to my skill. It takes a little bit because it's doing things.
That can be embedded as a web front end.
Yep. That can be a web front end. It can be inside Teams. Really, it's just a bot. So, but the thing to keep in mind with Power Virtual Agents is it is a different licensing model it's a full software as a service suite. So it's a different licensing model. It has things that come along with it. Okay, go ahead. Sorry,
yeah,
next question.
My question was about. Sorry, I'm not too sure if it's relevant to the developer tools, but while I'm in Dubai, on the toll-free number or on the number, if I want to join the Teams through a phone, I'm only seeing the number from Bahrain, which is a neighboring country. But is there any way, if Microsoft has any plans of having a local number for Dubai, UAE?
Can you reach out
Yeah.
on the teams.feedback and someone can follow up with you, or you can, if you DM me on Twitter with your details, I can find the right person to answer that question. But I'm definitely not the right person.
Sure, thanks. I'll probably send you a tweet.
Okay.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for that answer on that virtual agent on the website thing. But do you mind if you have any link sharing on that, like example or something, which we can take a look at it?
Yeah, so you can just go to powerva.microsoft.com and sign up for a demo would be the easiest way to see a link. But I'm sharing on my screen right now. This is the channels, so you can enable a bunch of channels. So for example, this is there's a demo website that you can just, so you can see my Power Virtual Agent. I have the ability to enable a bunch of different channels. So you can see all of the channels that I can enable, including a website, Teams, put it in Facebook, I can do it on Slack, whatever. It's very similar to any place where that you can have, not any place, but most of the places where you can have a regular bot, you can have one of these. So let me grab what the demo website looks like. So this is embedded inside of a fake website. So basically all of the Chrome around here is is like a demo website, and this is the chat with the bot itself. So this is embedded inside, and you can see that this is the same. Sorry, okay. Skill. So this is the same chat this is the exact same bot I was having a conversation with in Teams. It's the same bot.
All right,
but this is just a little demo.
And there's handoffs to a regular Teams channel too, right?
What do you mean by handoff?
Handoff, in other words, at some point after you're done, asking a question, somebody else can come on live from a Teams channel.
Do you mean a handoff from end user to bot to like?
Yeah, in other words, handoff from the bot to a live person.
You're talking about human handoff stuff. No, not for Power Virtual Agents. Not simply. Actually, but I don't think that they do. Maybe I don't want to say whether or not that's possible or not. I don't know that human handoff is possible currently. This would be the one that would have it. Yeah, that is a not human handoff. Okay. Yeah. So that's no, it does not handle human handoff, which is a pretty complex scenario to do in terms of forwarding messages. It depends on how you want to handle it, but you cannot do that in Power Virtual Agents currently.
Hey, I just had a question. Actually, you kind of hit on a little bit of it earlier, but proactive messaging. I was trying something in a bot where I've got a bot that actually I've got a conversation established with the user, but I'm trying to start a new conversation proactively without the conversation ID. So I don't necessarily have the conversation ID cached. I'm trying to start a new conversation, and I just can't get it to work.
What are you in C# or
in C#? Yeah.
Because reasons.
Actually, I threw a question up on Stack about it. It's got some of the code there, and I tried a few different things.
Okay.
But yeah, I just ping the link in the chat if you want to take a look at it. But
okay, I will offline look at this and dig into this. I'll also add. So this is my personal, what I usually use when I'm talking proactive messaging.
Yeah.
I don't want to bounce around the chat when I'm sharing. This over here. Where's the meeting chat? Anyways, I'll drop this in the chat in a sec, and I'll dig into that a bit. But basically, the core of the idea, right, is you need, in order to send a message to a one-to-one conversation, you have to do two things. One, it needs to be created, and then two, it needs to be sent. You need to send the message. So you can call create multiple times, even if it already exists. You'll never create a new one, right? You're always going to get the same conversation ID back. But if you don't have the conversation ID and all you have is the user ID, you can still recall create conversation. So you need one of.
So the question I had with create conversation is, can I create a conversation with a topic name?
With a topic name?
Yeah.
Probably. I don't think so.
Okay.
The issue with a lot of these endpoints is that they're sort of made to work across lots of different channels. And this is Bot Framework channels, not team channels. So the same endpoint's got to work in Slack and Facebook and Teams. But that means that some of the stuff just doesn't apply in channels. So when you start digging into why doesn't this, I'm adding group members to my create conversation call, why isn't that working? That's because Teams doesn't support it, but Facebook does. So a lot of it gets kind of confusing when you start to go down that road.
So I guess the end result of what I was trying to do there is there a way that a bot could proactively message a user in Teams, either proactively create a group conversation with a subject or a one-to-one conversation with a subject?
So you absolutely can no, basically. You definitely cannot create a group chat. You can't create a new group chat from a bot. The only way a bot can proactively send a message to a group chat is if someone installs the bot in that location. Once the conversation gets swapped to a group chat, the bot's got to be installed. And swapped to the group chat is important because it might look like a one-to-one conversation, but it's not. It's actually a group chat, and weird things happen. Like, for example, if you've got a conversation between you and two other people and the bot's installed there, and then like you remove those people, it gets weird. So don't do that because it's just weird things will happen. But in general, no, you cannot create a new group chat or add a topic. That's because one-to-one chats don't have names.
One-to-one chats, group chats have names, and you can create a group chat with 3 people and then drop one and give it a name, but you can't have a named one-to-one chat.
And the bot can't create a group chat. So basically, there's no way for.
Okay, that kind of answers my question. Is there anything on the roadmap that would allow a bot to create a group chat?
No, not right now that I'm aware of. Primarily for privacy stuff again. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know that they've looked at it.
Okay.
Really. But the default has always been bots don't get to do that unless you give me a really good reason why we should allow bots to start talking to more people.
Well, it's not even talking to more people, but it's having distinct conversations between the bot and a user. So if I want to have 3 different conversations between the bot and the user, the only way to do that is make them group conversations because then they can have subjects.
Oh yeah, that will and that's by Teams design, because Teams doesn't really want you to do that really at all. It wants you to have a single conversation between the bot and the user, and that's that because from Teams' perspective, the bot is part of an app, right? So it wants the conversation to look like this because it wants it to be part of an app, and so that's just sort of the app model. So they're never really going to make that scenario easier.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? I've got to go run to another meeting here in a couple minutes.
One final question from me, probably.
Go ahead.
It's about setting up a password for the meeting. Now, like usually on Skype or WebEx, there's an option to set up a password for a Teams meeting, or like for an online meeting. Do we have a similar option in Teams, or do we have plans in the pipeline to implement a password for Teams and having more easy way of joining a call through a meeting ID instead of the link?
Sorry, I'm definitely the wrong person to answer that question. I would. Can you use the Teams Dev feedback channel options to submit that question, or open an issue on GitHub on the docs? Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Or I just dropped my Twitter handle into the chat. If you send me a DM or a tweet and tag me, I will be able to follow up with you after I find the right person who can answer that question.
Sure, we'll do that.
Cool. Okay, thanks for hanging out. Please feel free to use either the Teams Dev feedback, which I actually monitor that channel too. So if you use any of those, or send me a tweet, or however you want to get in contact with me, feel free to do so, and I will follow up whenever I can. Again, thanks for joining us, and have a nice day.